Good afternoon and welcome, and good morning, perhaps, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Derek Bell, and here to talk to you today about a more engaging lead nurture campaign with Eloqua. So let's just get through some housekeeping and make our way to the main topic. So for those who join regularly, you'll know that Zoom is our preferred webinar platform for the user group. And we'll be recording these, of course, so they will be available to you following the session, and we'll email you or drop you a note to let you know that they're available. You can always cruise over our blog. There's lots to see there, so please feel free to do that. You can ask questions throughout the process, so please do that. We've got a colleague on the line to help. I'll introduce you to here in a moment. That is public. So if you want to use the Q&A, just be aware that everybody can see those questions, and you can in fact upload those if you want to. If you wanted to ask a private question, that's perfectly fine. You can use the chat function in order to do that. So introductions. So my name is Derek Bell. I'm the Director of Customer Success and Marketing here at Marketing Cube, and we'll be hosting today's session. And Adrian Jones, our CEO and founder, is also on the line today. So welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. So let's have a look. What's on our agenda? So we always invite people to submit questions prior to the webinar, and we had a couple of questions submitted this month, so we'll share those with you. And then we're going to dive straight into our topic. So what is lead nurturing? And it's a pretty broad response sometimes, so we want to try and put a bit of focus on it, and we can help you understand what we're trying to get across and how Eloqua can in fact help you in that process. Then we'll look at the actual experience, the lead nurture experience, and the impact to me that the campaign canvas can have on that process, and how you can use some elements on the campaign canvas to better understand the engagement of an individual and how you can enhance that engagement. One of the key points for today. And then where should you start? That's another big question we get. It might sound quite simple, but it can get quite complex. So let's have a look and revisit on where we should start. And then our final section is on testing and improving. So looking at how we can take our campaign and I suppose optimize is another term that you might use. So optimization. And then of course Q&A. But as I said, Q&A is kind of throughout the whole process. So please don't feel like you need to wait till the end of the webinar to ask questions, whenever you like. All right, so the first question comes from Danny, who's in the US, and quite an interesting comment from Danny as an Eloqua user. While he's been using Eloqua for quite some time, lead nurture is specifically something that he's not done. So he's hoping today's webinar will be able to help him with that, and then also looking for other resources beyond the webinar. And so my answer to him is, well, first of all, yes, the webinar, Danny, if you're on the line today, the webinar should in fact be a good starting point to give some context, but also be sure to visit our blog. There's lots of information on our blog, and you can, if you go directly to the blog, you can use the search function, just type in lead nurture, and you'll find lots of information. So feel free to do that. Now, another question we got was from Maria in New Zealand, and I've just scooted right past her question. So Maria, and I thought this was a valid question for all markets, really, it doesn't really matter where you were in the world. What advice do you have for organizations that need to build a nurture campaign for a single event, but the post-event nurture needs to nurture leads for multiple business units, and how do you deal with the complexity? So there's quite a few questions in there, really, if you kind of break it down. But the direction I took was to take a step back, and there was specific advice that she's asking for. So the key thing that's needed, if you're driving people into an event of some sort, and knowing Maria, this is a pretty big event we're talking about, with several thousands of people attending, the need to be able to communicate to those 10 different business units after the event, you have to know the interest of the individual in the context of each of those business units. So you have to have the data as early as possible so that you can do that. And so it could be, how do you know which one to send them down? Well, that's up to you. You need to figure that out. But I'm suggesting to you that it could be something like expressions of interest. I've been thinking about if it was university, it would be a little bit easier, because it would be, is it the arts faculty, is it the business faculty, etc. In traditional B2B sense, it could be around interest in particular products or services, which is where you're going to drive them after an event. So if that's the case, we need to ask those questions upfront as early as possible. And in the context of an event, it's pretty easy, right? People registering for an event, you can ask them probably a few more questions than you would normally for downloading a white paper, for example. So that was the main piece of advice we would give there, because that would then really drive things like dynamic content, which you could utilize to present more relevant information in the nurture that would follow. And given there's up to 10 or 10 plus business units, you could use dynamic content, absolutely. And she may well use dynamic content in aspects of it. But I would almost lean towards possibly separate canvases, only that if you've got 10 different business units, unless each of the 10 business units is strictly speaking going to be sending 8 emails over a 4-month period, and they're all exactly the same timing wise. It's just the content that will differ. Well, yes, you could use dynamic content, but I would struggle to believe that 10 business units would all potentially agree that that's exactly what they want to do at exactly those timeframes. So having 10 separate canvases just gives you a little bit more flexibility in what you're doing, and also maybe slightly easier reporting. So that would be our advice for that one. All right, let's rock it on. So before we begin, what we wanted to do is make sure we can get some clarity around this question. First of all, why are you doing this? So why is it that lead nurturing has come up as a point of discussion in the team, and what's your motivation? What is it you're trying to achieve? Is it to reach marketing KPIs? Is it accelerating leads? Is it delivering MQLs? Is it supporting sales to hit their sales target? Is it for sales and marketing unification? More so than alignment, potentially. Now, to maintain engagement with your leads, that one's kind of interesting, right? So you've got a lot of people sitting in the database. How engaged are they? And are you, in fact, driving them through various campaigns that's keeping them engaged? So in other words, is there a nurture in place at the moment, or are they potentially falling through the cracks and not getting picked up for some reason? All sorts of motivations. Are you trying to increase conversion? That's usually a pretty strong yes to that one. And are you using lead score to push more leads to the call center, for example? All of these different scenarios. And it's not that this is a binary exercise, by the way. It may well be that all of these are on your list of reasons why you're looking to do lead nurturing. And that's fine too. And probably a bit crazy to have all of them, but that's okay. There are really no wrong answers necessarily, but just having some clarity around the objective for the lead nurture is going to help you build the lead nurture. Okay. And if it's simply getting MQLs to the sales team, well, that's fine. That's fine. We can help with that. That's not a problem. So some of the questions that I would pose to you if you were tasked with building and automating a new lead nurture campaign like this one is to really focus on who you're nurturing. So really understand who that buyer is and who the intended audience is for the campaign. That will drive so much of the way you obviously develop your content, but also the actual experience that you're delivering as well. So matching of your buyer's journey from a time frame point of view can be really helpful. By that, I mean, is your typical buyer's journey, is it a 6 to 12 month period? Is it a 3-year period? Or is it in fact a 2-month period? You need to have some sort of understanding of that time frame on average to be able to plan out what your lead nurture campaign actually looks like. And then when you start to do that, the next question is, well, hang on a minute, do we have enough content that is going to make this campaign engaging to last for 2 years or 3 years? And how many emails is it that's going out in that time frame? Is it one a month? Is it one every 2 months? Is it every 2 weeks? What's the time frame of that lead nurture actually look like? And thinking early on can be helpful around, is there going to be a mix of gated and non-gated content? So some things you just want people to click on and download and access. Maybe it's accessing existing blog content that's performing really well on the website. You could drive them to that. No need to put a gate on it. But if it's a white paper or thought leadership of some sort or video content, that you're working on, then you may want to gate that and put a form in place so people can fill in the form, answer a few more questions, which is always good from a progressive profiling point of view. Then, in order to get the answer to which of the questions we potentially should be asking on those forms, then that's really where we should be thinking about the MQL. What is it we need? So what is it that sales have requested of you as a minimum level of information? Do we must have a mobile phone number? Clearly, you'll have to have an email address because that won't be an Eloqua if you don't have an email address. So sales want email, obviously. They probably also want a mobile phone or cell phone number, right? Maybe having an understanding of the geography. Is the person East Coast, West Coast, or do we actually want state or province information in that as well? Country, maybe it's just as high level as country, and country's enough. So geography, there can be a whole range of things, but whatever those questions are that sales need in order to produce that MQL, let's make sure our forms are trying to capture that information. So that's just a couple of things for you to think about if you've been tasked with building and automating a lead nurture campaign, but we have loads more to share. So let's jump in. Okay, so what is a lead nurture campaign? And I think this one is an important one to get some clarity on as early as possible in our conversation today. In order to tell you or share with you what we believe it is, I'm just going to start with what it's not, okay? So what is it not? It's not just simply a few emails sent in succession after each other with no real objective behind them. If there's no personalized content being sent, if there's an autoresponder from a form, that's not a nurture. A simple campaign that sends multiple emails potentially to whomever, but with no consideration or change to the journey or the experience based on their engagement. So if they're clicking and they're opening, but you're not doing anything to change or alter the journey, then it's really not a lead nurture campaign. Okay. One of the key aspects of a lead nurture campaign, we would say, is that it's what we call an always on. So let me explain that here in a minute. But the key thing here is that you're trying to develop and refine relationships, and you can't do that with one email at a time. You need to have some sort of a journey in place, and you need to try and get to, obviously, the person who's making the buying decision. And so we need to understand who that person is so that we can sort of tailor our comms, tailor the journey, so to speak. Now, the mechanics of what we're going to share with you today in relation to nurturing, and by the mechanics, I mean, what does the campaign canvas look like? The mechanics of it in nurturing people is not unique to a lead nurture campaign. The mechanics of a nurture can be applied both pre-sale and post-sale. Think of onboarding campaigns. An onboarding campaign is really a nurture, but just with different content, essentially. You're trying to educate people over time about your organization. But our focus today is lead nurturing, pre-sales, and always on as a campaign. So let's look at a better definition. So lead nurturing is a strategic marketing practice that uses data and targeted content to develop relationships and guide potential customers or leads through their buying journey, ultimately aiming to convert them into paying customers. And so the lead nurture campaign is always on. And so always on is exactly that. And as you know, in Eloqua, you have a start date and an end date for every single campaign. And so that end date can technically be whenever you need it to be. And so you could put it as 2035 if you wanted to. And so that's what we mean by always on. There is no button you tick or option you select within Eloqua that makes it an always on campaign, but it's just that end date. It's pushing that end date way out so that it's not going to grind to a halt or turn off during your summer break, for example. Okay. So that's what we mean by always on. So the targeted approach anticipates the specific requests or requirements of each prospect, leveraging the insights into their background, things like their title, industry, their role potentially, and their stage within the buyer's journey. So it's a targeted approach. Right? It's not a spray and pray, as we like to use that term occasionally, but it's a target approach. And what we're trying to do is leverage those insights into their background. And we do that generally through profile information. And then the other key point in relation to lead nurturing is that it fosters ongoing engagement with your brand by delivering highly relevant content, such as white papers, webinars, video content, blog content, whatever it may be. But you deliver those things based on what you know about the person, and generally dynamic content is the vehicle that you're going to use in an email in order to try and get that out. So, trying to get some automated insight reporting can really help you navigate through what you're trying to do. What you essentially want, and the whole purpose of this lead nurturing campaign, is to be front of mind as they approach a buying decision. So, as the person is moving through their buying process, what you want them to experience is your brand in their inbox on a regular basis, delivering really good content that's hopefully helping address any business challenge or problem that they may have at that particular time. Now, this applies and is no different to whether you're a university addressing and selling to a high school leaver or even a mature age student who's looking to do additional study. It's really no different. It's a nurture. You're trying to understand and identify who they are, what their objectives are, what they're trying to achieve, and then try and understand that buying period and what that's going to look like. Or maybe you're selling farming equipment, or maybe you're selling financial services, or anything that kind of takes a considered purchase. People typically don't just stroll into a store and buy a $1 million combine harvester, for example. So these are decisions that people go through and thought processes that people apply that take time. It's a considered purchase. Okay. Now, the other complexity that you've got, and there's loads of research from Forrester and others that kind of talk about this, is that process today, especially in a B2B context, can have multiple people involved. Okay. You're not dealing with one person, you're often dealing with multiples, and not always one decision maker. Unfortunately, a few decision makers. That's a whole nother challenge. But we can, at least if we know who the person is we're talking to, get the information that's hopefully relevant to them. If we look at today's topic in the context of the customer life cycle, then really it's stages 1, 2, and 3 that we're really focusing on today, and arguably a little bit of number 4. But as for the other parts, sort of, using a product or service, receiving it, maintaining and recommending it, that's kind of the post-sale stuff. So we won't be focusing on that. We're looking at lead nurturing. And so lead nurturing is for those people who have yet to purchase a product or service from your organization. So that's our focus. So with all that information that we've shared so far, are there any questions at all in relation to any of those various points? If not, all right, let's rock it on. Okay, so the actual experience, the lead nurture experience that we're trying to deliver. So what we're trying to do here is really tailor a CX or a customer experience based on what you know. And you can only base it on what you know if you have the data to support it, and very specifically first-party data that's been shared with you. And hopefully, like all marketers globally, you're busting your butts to gather as much first-party data as you can before Google decide to completely close down and shut down all cookies. So I hope you're working on that one. Now, from an experience point of view, now we're trying to put ourselves in the mind of the person going through your campaign. Will you look to choose and accelerate hot leads? First of all, we probably need to define what a hot lead is necessarily, and can you identify it through behavior or profile, etc. Think about that. How will you notify sales? So once you've actually got the hot lead in place and the campaign is working and pushing people through, what sort of notification process do you want to do? You can do this from the campaign canvas, is the reason I bring that up. So it could be that lead score reaches a certain threshold, for example. We can then push them through a program, which can then in turn push them directly into the CRM, for example, to present a hot lead. So progressive profiling becomes a very helpful tool for you. So not specifically on the campaign canvas, obviously, but utilizing a form or multiple forms where you're able to ask the right questions, and specifically ask questions that you don't already know the responses to. There's no point re-asking. I mean, there are so many organizations whose content I love and I access regularly, Well, it just kills me every time having to answer the same questions again and again and again. And of course, they usually going to ask you like 12 or 15 questions, which is just even nicer. So progressive profiling, Eloqua forms on Eloqua landing pages where forms will pre-fill with known information and simply leave blank the ones you don't know the information to. So an extremely valuable tool. Event attendance, downloads, overall engagement, lead scoring, all of those things form part of the lead nurture experience. Now, if we want to look at some really specific Eloqua campaign canvas or multi-step campaigns scenarios, these are some of the things you need to think about. And it goes back a little bit to the point earlier, which is what qualifies a person to enter the lead nurture campaign. So this will largely be driven from your segment. And it may sound like really obvious. Well, if we create a new contact, well, they should definitely go into the lead nurture. Well, what if it's a new staff member? What if it's a business partner? What if it's actually a competitor? There are a whole range of other exceptions, exclusions that you probably want to think about as well. And at the same end or the other end of the spectrum, what qualifies the person to exit the lead nurture campaign? Sure, they can go all the way through the campaign and receive all of the different emails. Fantastic. And the logical step is, yes, they would exit the campaign. But is there any point throughout where there would be other reasons why they should exit the campaign? What if your nurture campaign runs for, let's say, 8 months? And in that 8 month period, the person and their organization actually become a customer. So they're no longer a prospect or a lead, they're now actually a customer. Should they continue through that process? Some would argue they probably should be taken out and moved over to an onboarding campaign of some sort. So think about why people would need to exit the campaign. It's pretty much it's pretty easy to organize, right? It's not difficult. It's just knowing that it's an option and that you can get people out of the campaign just as easily as you get them into the campaign. So the other one to think about is lead score changes. So you would hope and anticipate through the course of the lead nurture campaign that there would be an increase in engagement for some individuals. And so if there's an increase in engagement where potentially you're gathering more profile information about that person, that probably is going to deliver a change to your lead score. So the lead score change, someone progressing up potentially, is another way to create your marketing qualified leads and have those go through. Now, from the campaign canvas, we can observe that. We can understand that there has been a change, whether change is up or down, whatever it might be, or what the new score is at any one time. So if you've got that information and it's available right away, well, again, we can potentially escalate them from that campaign canvas directly into the CRM as a marketing qualified lead. So it's one way to do it. And then the hot lead concept comes in. So is it a lead score that creates the hot lead or vice versa? How are you going to define that? And how are we going to notify sales? As I said, there's a few ways to do that. To give you an example too, actually, so you can sometimes find that changing channels can help. We can get a little tunnel vision sometimes, maybe as Eloqua users, that, well, email will solve the world's problems. Obviously not quite. One example we have with a client here in the Australian market was a big event, a couple of thousand people attending. Email was clearly the most economical way for them to do most of that process. They did find a segment within that group that weren't responding overly well. And so they did a shift from email to SMS. And this was done a little bit on the fly, by the way. So it wasn't as though it was beautifully planned to happen sort of 3 months earlier. It was literally looking at data, analyzing the data. I think it was just a couple of weeks out from the event itself, and found that segment they're a little bit lazy in relation to the email engagement. Shift over to SMS. They were already opted into here via SMS. They had a 200% increase in registrations from that sort of sub-segment, I should say. Thinking about cross-channel, multi-channel, omni-channel, etc., all those things, there are definitely ways that if you're going through a nurture campaign, you've got 8 or 10 or 15 emails in that nurture, and somebody hasn't opened the first 3 or 5 emails, is sending them another 5 emails maybe the best option? Maybe a different channel is a good idea, and then potentially bring them back in at some point. So yeah, think about that as you're looking at the experience as well. So to help look at an experience and kind of think about the experience from a collection of first-party data, it might look something like this. So this is just a very rudimentary concept of the emails on the left-hand side, first, second, third, as you kind of go down the list. And then what I've done is just list next to those emails, maybe some of the questions you're going to want to ask. Should they engage and visit a landing page as a result of each of those emails? So, and it's what's most important to you. It's what is going to help you deliver an MQL. They're the questions you need to be asking. Don't sit in an ivory tower thinking, oh, yep, marketing, we're all over it. We know exactly what they need to do. And then you pass it on to sales like, well, hang on, where are they? What's their pain point? Do we have a phone number? Okay, so make sure we get together with sales or whoever receives the MQLs and have a chat with them. Progressively moving, I suppose, each lead towards an MQL by getting that minimal data is really critical. And so mapping it out and planning it and using essentially an Eloqua form with the progressive profiling is how you're going to achieve this in a much nicer way. And with the progressive profile form, you can prioritize the delivery of those specific questions. Either you can prioritize them, what's most important to you, and Eloqua will sort of chip away at the priority list, or you can simply give Eloqua the list and say, just randomize it. I don't mind which one you get first, just randomize the delivery of those questions. So you've got options there to kind of play with. Now, the thing that you're trying to do, obviously, as they're progressing towards a purchase or continuing to go through that purchase process, is you want to try and support the buyer with more relevant information to help them do a number of things. And those things are typically more research, more evaluation. Influence is an interesting one, okay? Building a case study and a business case to reach a buying decision might be something that they need to do within their businesses. And in that whole process, there's lots of support you can give to the sales team and potentially service as well that shows engagement, it shows insight, it shows very specific responses to questions that they may have asked or you've asked and they've given you answers to. There's lots of information there that you can share that you're gathering as marketers along the way. And so Prospect Profiler is probably the smartest way to do that. Now, in order to make all of this happen, you really need to understand your buyer's journey. And I would ask you, have you mapped your buyer's journey? Is this something you sat down with as a team necessarily and have actually mapped out? This is something that we've done with a number of clients. We have a proprietary process that we walk clients through in order to do this. If this is something that you'd like to hear about or understand further about, you can reply to any email that you get from me, or you can scan the QR code and just fill in our contact us form, and we'd be very happy to help you with that. But one of the key reasons that the notion of the buyer's journey is so important is because it can vary so much. Even within the same industry. So if we look at property, for example, so in property, there are multiple types of buyers, but let's say you've got a first home buyer versus a property investor. So the first home buyer is very emotionally involved in the process. It might take them 12 plus months in order to make a decision. However, the property investor, there's no emotion involved. They may not even ever see the property. It's just purely a transaction. It's a 3-bedroom apartment in Chicago, and it's in a decent neighborhood. I'm happy with that. Yep, okay, yes. The school's nearby. Great, ticks a few boxes. Should be pretty easy for us to be able to rent that one out. Great, they're done in 2 months. Okay, so 12 plus months, 2 months. Same industry, arguably doing the same thing, buying a property. One is a first home buyer, the other is a property investor. The earlier you know that as a real estate marketer or a marketer working in property and construction, obviously the smarter your communications can be at that point. So that persona is really critical, and also understanding that journey that the buyer on average or typically would go through. Think about the high school student. Again, you're a university and you're selling a whole range of products and services. But you can either have a prospective client who is arguably a high school leaver, someone who's maybe just finishing it's year 12, it's their last year in high school, or it's a 35-year-old marketer who's exploring and looking at options for MBAs. So again, same process, not same process, same product, arguably, that you're selling, but two very different types of buyers that you're needing to work with. Think about finance. Finance is another interesting one. So whether you're a broker, a brokerage firm, you provide financial advice, etc. Different types of clients. Again, in Australia, we use the term the mum and dad or mum and pop investor, and they're a different type of buyer to maybe an organization who's got some surplus capital that they want to sort of put aside and make some money out of. Two very different types of clients. So you've got institutional investors, you've got advisors, there's a whole world out there. So you've got to be sure to get the persona down, so then you can understand the journey. And in our world as Eloqua users, we're typically in a more B2B or a high value transaction, which can still be B2C, but typically it's a high value transaction. So the buying decision I would use to really differentiate that is, if you're off to buy a pair of Levi's, that's probably going to take you 30 minutes max to do. And you're going to make that decision in 30 minutes. Am I getting Levi's or am I getting Wranglers? That's it, right? 30 minutes, you're done and dusted, and you may not even have to leave the house because you've done the whole thing online anyway. Okay. Or you may go down to the supermarket or the department store in order to make that transaction. But it's a much simpler, much shorter, and we're talking about happening in minutes, potentially, not in days, weeks, months, or years. Okay. So mapping that buyer's journey is really critical. But let's jump in and have a look. I've just got a bit of a mock-up of it's actually a template that I use myself if I'm creating a nurture campaign. So let's jump in and have a look at that. So give you a little bit of an idea. All right. So here's one I prepared earlier. Let me zoom in a little bit. Look, so fundamentally, one of the key things that you'll need to pick up fairly early in this process is that it's likely you're going to have multiple entry points into your nurture campaign. There won't just be one single segment, because over time you'll run a campaign and you'll have people access a form and you'll think, you know what, gee, if people come through this campaign and they complete this form, and if they answer this question this way, we really should add them to the nurture campaign. Perfectly normal process, right? So you're going to end up with multiple entry points across the top of your canvas. So what I've done in my template is I have leads from the CRM, and then leads from Eloqua campaigns. But the reality is it won't ever be quite that neat. Well, you'll end up with these multiple segments potentially across the top of the canvas, which is fine. It's good news, right? So leads from the CRM, reason I wanted to really point that one out to you is that while you as marketers and your team may be very much involved in but providing a whole bunch of forms and having people visit the website or participate in campaigns, and you control how they flow into the nurture campaign. It may well be, though, too, that you want to provide the sales team, or specifically the CRM user community, with a way for them to be able to drop an individual into a campaign, and you can. So if you're a Salesforce CRM user community or Oracle Sales Cloud user community, etc., there are ways that you can create constructs within the CRM that the CRM user can just add people to a campaign, for instance, which will then have them flow through into Eloqua and into your respective lead nurture campaign. So that's nice and easy to do. So if we look at the nurture from a really classic nurturing point of view, it really is. And if I've just highlighted here, so I've got two screens running, that's why I'm kind of bouncing backwards and forwards here. What you're looking at essentially is an email going out, some sort of an introduction, waiting for a period of time. Did they open it? Yes or no? If they didn't, you may well send a repeat. I think that's a great idea, especially for a nurture campaign. They may have just been busy and missed the first one. So don't write them off. Try again. Different subject line is the only real change you need to make, because they didn't even open the first one. Now, if you look at that carefully, and as I begin to scroll down, you can see that it essentially is kind of repeat, repeat, repeat. And that's really what the nurture is. And I put 4 days because I just had to put a value in for something. But it could be that yours is wait 1 month. It could be that it's wait 2 weeks, whatever that is. But again, bring back to you the importance of understanding that journey that your buyer is on. Okay. Now, I've just simply dropped in how to, or did they open an email? But we could get a little bit more detailed in relation to trying to make understand engagement a bit further. And that is, did they click on the email? Okay. Obviously, a better indicator of engagement than just simply opened. Now, when you ask the question, did they click on an email? It means, did they click on anything? You're not being specific. You're just simply trying to understand, did they click on anything in the email? If we want to get more specific, because you have a very specific call to action, or maybe a couple of calls to action in there, then that's where you would use a shared filter. So a shared filter gives you the ability to be very specific with specific URLs in place. Okay, so a shared filter can be a good way to do it. And I find typically very early stages of a nurture campaign, you're really looking to understand at quite not vague levels, that's not the right term, but I want the opposite of specific. So things like visited the website. Okay, so visited the website very early in your nurture campaign is great because it helps you at least just get an idea that, yes, okay, great, they've looked at the website. At that very early stage in the nurture, you kind of don't care which page they've looked at. The fact that they're even looking at the website is kind of a thumbs up, right? As you move through the campaign, though, you may want to get a little bit more specific because your campaign is gearing them or nurturing, gearing them towards a certain area of the website. So let's get all of those URLs, drop those into a shared filter, and now we can see if they're looking at any of that target information that you've created. So shared filter is the one you need in order to do that. You can obviously start to look at SMS as well, is another way to do it. And that can be that audience split, I'm sorry, not audience split, that slight change in engagement or channel that we talked about, the example I gave you about our client here in Australia with their event. Another one you can use is the compare contact field. So the compare contact field, and there's also a compare custom object field, but contact is usually what we want in this case. So if you think about all of the profile information that you've got, and you want to be able to just check over time, do we have this? Do we have that? Yes or no? Obviously, you're only going to ask the question if you're going to do anything different as an outcome of knowing that yes, they are in this industry, or no, they're in that industry, or their primary product interest is this versus this. You can use that information to kind of split and start to divide your nurture. Once you get industry information, for instance, or maybe it's primary product interest, maybe they leave this nurture, which maybe is a high level, more generic sort of nurture, and we take them off to an industry specific nurture campaign or a very product or service specific nurture campaign. So have a think about that. Okay, so it's very simple to do that. You've got so let's say if it's industry, you may ask them, are they in XYZ industry? If the answer is yes, well then what you can do is actually use the where are we action steps to move them to another campaign. So you would do something like that. Are they in XYZ industry? Yes, they are. And then you would use move to campaign and you actually move them out to a different campaign. So move to campaign means you're taking them out of this one and you're moving them over to the next one. Okay. So where do you start in the process? Good question. So my key advice to you is to start simply. Okay. Don't try and boil the ocean. Don't try and create this mega complex lead nurture campaign that takes you 18 months to build just the content. Okay, so we want to try and take it a little bit easier on ourselves and not be too hard. So some advice would be to focus on a specific segment to begin with. I find this is a really good way to kind of get started on the nurture. Simple calls to action, don't overcomplicate it. Once you start to understand the engagement or lack of engagement, we can then start to make adjustments or optimize those as we go through. And you can slowly add different paths. Like I talked about in that example, if you know now that they're in a particular industry, then we can take them out of that nurture and move them to a different one. So that's what we mean by slowly add additional paths or journeys. And then maybe it's even based on their buyer persona. So it kind of can be quite organic and can grow over time, but try not to create that monster campaign to start with. Just start simply. And don't get overwhelmed. And I think it's pretty easy to get overwhelmed because once you start to get down into the detail, you'll start to realize that there's actually a whole bunch of other audiences that we kind of need to think about, and we need to think about that carefully. So you'll quickly discover that simply saying, well, all new leads need to go into the lead nurture campaign is not really going to cut it. Okay, that doesn't really quite work because there's all these other groups that you've got as well that you need to think about, and how do we transition them into the campaign. So it might look something like this. If I was to say start simply, these might be a couple of or three different versions of starting simply. Perhaps it's all net new leads from a specific inquiry form, and maybe that's it. Whoever comes through that form, we're going to push them into our nurture, and let's see how that goes. Okay, that's the first one. Next one. What about all contacts in a specific industry and maybe with X or Y persona? So now we're sort of lifting it a little bit industry specific. Remember, what we're looking for here is just a starting point, just somewhere to begin our nurture campaign versus taking 5 million people through all at once. We're just going to narrow it down a tad. Okay. And then maybe it's, all contacts in one of 4 specific industries with X or Y persona. This all depends on the size of your database and your audience and all that kind of stuff as to what you're thinking. But having a sample size sometimes to go through is a good idea. And by sample size, I would say at a bare minimum, you probably want in the multiple hundreds, I think would be a good place to start from a sort of sampling testing point of view, like a soft launch, if you want to call it that. If you could have 300, 400, 500 people kind of going through the campaign, push them through, see how they go, look at the engagement, and then do a little bit of refinement or optimization based on their engagement or their lack of engagement as they move through. And maybe it's all retired leads. This would be a really safe audience, right? So all retired leads or less engaged contacts. I mean, it's probably harder to get their engagement, but what have you got to lose, right? If they're not really engaging, it's probably a good safe testing audience that is in fact a live audience at the same time. So the lead nurture campaign, if you were to sit down in a room and kind of whiteboard it, it could potentially look something like this. And you start to break down each email, then you start to look at the topics and things that you potentially want to cover in those. And don't forget to factor in things like dynamic content. So a single email is not a static entity. A single email can in fact have multiple renditions or versions of itself that it would be displaying to people. Now, what I'm trying to show here is kind of that breakaway where maybe after sending email 4, we identify the person's in a specific industry, for example. Therefore, we're going to take them away and move them into a separate canvas and start a slightly different journey as they move through. But meanwhile, everything kind of keeps progressing for those who have not shared a particular industry. And so they keep moving through that journey. So very simple to do. You saw that element I showed you there on the canvas. So the one thing I quickly wanted to show you from a segmentation point of view. So for me, if I'm building a segment here in Marketing Cube's instance of Eloqua, I will typically start with a base segment. Is this one here? You can call it whatever you want, I suppose, but mine's called a base segment. And the base segment really begins life with more exclusions than it does anything else. Okay, so it's inactives, it's unsubscribed, it's hard bounces, and so on and so forth. Now, in order to identify net new additions to your database, it's actually quite simple, and that's what I wanted to show you here. So if we take add a filter content, I like to drag them to the top because they're my included ones. And I'm going to grab compare contact fields. What I'm looking for is the date created field. And so date created is a system field within Eloqua, and it refers to the date that the contact was created within Eloqua. Okay, not the CRM, but within Eloqua. And so because it's a date field, there's some really cool things you can do. You can be really super dynamic in the variables that you want there. What I'm actually looking for, though, is I'm looking for net new leads that have been produced in Eloqua, really maybe in the last 48 hours. So what I might do is choose within the last, and I'll just do 2 days or 48 hours. And let's see what that gives me as a return. All right, so four contacts actually. So one of them obviously falls into this list here somewhere. It's probably a Gmail or something. So we typically try and avoid Gmails in our database. Okay, but so one of them will fall in there. So there you go. So in order to identify those net new, and the reason I show you this is because in most cases, those three people from the last 48 hours would be candidates to drop into a lead nurture campaign. Now, of course, you may want to add a few more criteria to exclude in some cases, etc. But that's just a really simple way for how you can begin simply and understand who it is you're talking to and trying to get the right people into the campaign at the right time. All right, so we're just a little bit over time here. I apologize. This is our last point, which is test and improve, which essentially is your insight and analytics area within Eloqua. So multiple things you can do. A/B testing can be a good one. And A/B testing, you can use the simple email campaign construct within Eloqua. But when I talk A/B testing, what I'm really talking here is being able to look at your insight reporting on a fairly regular basis, kind of understand what's going on in relation to the different pieces of content. Now, constantly logging in and extracting different reports out of Eloqua or out of any analytics platform can be a bit tiresome. So what you may want to also do is look at creating an agent to have those reports delivered to you on a regular basis, so that they're kind of a prompt for you to have a look at the performance, which helps you from an optimization point of view. But you want to get that baseline down. So if someone says to you, how's the campaign performing? Well, compared to what? So you want to get a baseline in relation to opens and click-through rates and all those sorts of things. So you've got something to compare it against. But the way people engage with your lead nurture campaign is going to be very different to how they engage with your event and other types of campaigns. So be aware of that. Now, to make that process a little bit easier, another way to do it, instead of having to potentially get those reports delivered in Excel, in email on a regular basis, is to look at using Insight dashboards to help. So we've done this for a number of clients, and that's why the QR code is on your screen. So if you're interested, you can scan that and contact us. But what we've done is we've built out a range of campaign-specific dashboards for clients so that they can look at a dashboard, they can look at overall engagement, they can see the email assets involved, and they can see the performance of those individual assets over time frames. Okay. And that really does help from an optimization point of view. And if I go back to that client that I mentioned where we are able to identify that segment that weren't really engaging, and they switched over to SMS communications, that was largely based on, I understand, from a dashboard, and they have multiple dashboards for their big campaigns that they run. And so it was dashboard that was able to give them that level of insight without having to sort of drill through multiple spreadsheets or digging through multiple reports within Eloqua. Have a think about that. And the lead nurture campaign is the perfect candidate for a dashboard because it's something that's always on. And so you're always feeding information into it. I won't jump into Insight because we don't really have time to do that. And I think we have to shift that to next month, which I had to do for the Asia Pac audience as well. But I did have some screenshots here for you. So as you may or may not be aware, Insight is moving to a new home within the Oracle world. And so on the left-hand side there, you can see what it looks like today. And on the right-hand side, it's what it's going to look like within the next month or so. We understand. Essentially, it's a shift to the Redwood interface that is making the change. And so it's the Oracle Application Server, or OAS. So you can see it's not dramatically different, but yeah, just a little bit nicer from a Redwood point of view. All right. So thank you for hanging in there. I'm a 5 minutes overdue, but so next month we're online, Thursday, the 2nd of May. And with the shift in summertime here at our end and your end, so today we met at 4 p.m. Eastern. I think what we're going to do next month is probably shift back to maybe 9 or 10 a.m. Eastern, probably 10 a.m. Eastern. So that's going to be about 9 a.m. sort of Chicago time. So that's Midwest, is that right? You'll have to help me with your time zones, but I think you know what I mean. If I tell you Chicago, you know where that is. So that's where we'll be at. And that does then make it a much more attractive for our European friends as well, sort of stretching from, Poland, Berlin, and through into London. So I think that they'll be a bit happier with those timeframes as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them. I'm happy to hang on the line here for a few minutes, and you'll hear from us with links to our blog post, which I've already started to craft. So thank you so much again for joining us. Have a wonderful evening or afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.